Hi, this is Andrew Smith, instructor at Ferris State University, runner of art by Smitty.com. And this is going to be part 2 of my Dota 2 workshop tutorial series. In the first part, we covered a few different topics. We covered all the tools that you need to get started. We also talked about how to import and download models from the Dota 2 website to use for reference, and we also talked about how to get a few plugins working and the Dota 2 Hero shader working. So in part 2, we're going to talk about creating silhouettes to concept our weapon design. We're going to talk about doing some paint overs after we create some screenshots from our character in the game engine, and then throughout the whole process, we're really going to be talking about we're going to be using the Dota 2 character art guide to kind of really emphasize the importance of value patterns within your design. One of the tools that we're going to be using first is this tool called Alchemy. If you want to find the website, it's al.chemy.org, and this is a great free resource that you can use to concept silhouettes. So check out their website here. You can see some of the different gallery pieces that people have made using Alchemy. In my opinion, it's the best way to create designs and concept characters, vehicles, weapons, compositions, all different types of artwork. So I use Alchemy almost on every creative project that I'm working on, where I have some creative freedom. In this case with Dota, we have a lot of creative freedom because we're creating our own items for the workshop. Coming up next, I want you to open up the Dota 2 character art guide, and this is an amazing resource that Valve has released for free. So thank you, Valve. I really appreciate that. Anyway, let's move on to the next page, silhouettes. So hitting some of these guidelines, a hero silhouette must be clearly identifiable at first glance. You think about games like Killzone 2, Gears of War, where you can see a character from far away, and with the glowing eyes and other parts of the silhouette, you immediately know this is either a good guy, this is a bad guy. I know exactly who I'm looking at right away. So silhouette is probably one of the most important things to have with a character. If you have good silhouette, it's kind of hard to go wrong. So moving on, here it says weapons also need a unique read, but they should also work to complement the character's design. Okay, so thinking about Bloodseeker, he's got these giant weapons and swords that are almost integral to the part of his design, makes him kind of look like a hurricane / Wolverine from far away. So value gradients, this is a really cool technique that they talk about, and you can kind of see the comparison here, where you kind of start with this dark value and work your way up throughout the character. This starts at the limbs and moves in towards the torso, and then finally ends kind of usually around the head of the character. So you can see here in this fox, dark to medium to light. Very, very cool. So do some research, read through that. Value patterning, however, is, I believe, almost as important as having an interesting silhouette. Now they go even further and they expound upon this, saying that the human eye instinctively looks for boundaries between areas of contrast, so it makes sense to establish contrasting blocks of value to highlight the various forms in the characters. And I think this also goes well with the weapons. Now the weapons being so far away, you can see here some of these weapons, they tend to be a little bit darker because, again, the lighter values want to work up towards the head. Now one thing that I looked at with Bloodseeker is, if I bring up this image real quick of Bloodseeker, his weapon is kind of light on the end. So there's kind of this exception to the rule here with this character, so I'm going to try and emulate that in my design. Moving on further, we're not really going to talk about color and saturation too much. Less is more. And they give some great examples further in this document, but you really want to stick with 1, 2, and maybe 3 different colors for your weapons. But with Bloodseeker, he's only got 2. He's got, well, kind of 2. He's got red and white. And then there's a few different value shifts with the red, but for the most part, it's just red and white. More detail is going to go on towards his face, where you get all 3 different color schemes going. And then you get into more different color schemes, color mixing, and here's some examples of, less is more. Okay, and then they kind of break that down into more detail. Some of these other characters where, the design on the right reads much better than the design on the left, and you're just taking away one color. So we want to, read through this, study it, and work these ideas into your artwork. Okay, so moving on to the next step with alchemy. Now I'm going to go ahead and minimize this. And what I want to do is start up alchemy. This is what you're going to see. Your screen might be white. If you hover your mouse towards the top, you get all these options here. Now, the color swatch on the front is what you're going to paint with. So if I were to paint right now, you're not going to see anything. The color, if I switch it in the background, is our background color. And I just choose the default gray. I like black sometimes because it, the human eye just sees more shapes in the darkness than it can in the light. But when I'm doing my silhouettes, I like to do this neutral color here and then draw with black on top of it. Everybody works differently. Choose what works best for you. So now I can kind of draw a line and see my shapes. At any point I can hit clear. If you've tried this already, you know that you can't undo anything in alchemy. It's like that on purpose. It's meant to be a very artistic, conceptual program. So that I think is pretty awesome. It really trains you to think more creatively and less technically. Coming up here, I usually like to have my styles thick here. So now when I draw, it's going to create a nice thick shape. And I've already got some really cool silhouettes that I can already see a character or a composition or a vehicle or whatever have. In this case, it'll be, a weapon. So I can kind of already see an upside down gun here with a blade sticking out the top of it with a banana clip, something interesting like that. Anyway, I'm getting clear of that really quickly. Over here, you can create all these different, like if I choose speed shapes, now all of a sudden it's just going to create some crazy random designs. I'm just going to go back to regular shapes. That's all I'm really going to use for this, but you can kind of start to see the power of this. Now, here's your transparency. So I'm still drawing with black, and since it's transparent, every time I draw over it, it's going to kind of add on top. That can be really nice when you're doing like an entire character, but I'm just going for the shape of the weapon. So I usually stick that and leave it at 100 for what I'm going to be working on. You have obviously a lot of different effects that you can apply here, like the mirror effect, which is actually quite handy with characters up until a certain point when you have to break it up with symmetry. But from here, I'm just going to kind of come in, grab my Wacom tablet, and just kind of start drawing some shapes that would represent, the Bloodseeker's kind of got this half moon battalion that he's kind of swinging around carelessly. Once you have some really interesting basic shapes, I'm going to come over here, grab my color, and make it the background color. So now I can start, cutting shapes out of this. I know he has a handle. So this could potentially be the handle, and here at the beginning he has something he needs to deal damage with, so it needs to be sharp. And if you ever kind of cut over a part and you don't really like it too much, you can always come back with the black color and keep redefining your shape. But the idea is that we're working pretty conceptually at this point, and we can start making some really interesting designs with these shapes. So the idea is that I want you guys to go through and literally paint 10 to 20 to 30 different shapes based on what you're creating. And then, obviously once you get some basic shapes down, you can start going into more detail and really start to define your silhouettes that you're kind of going for. So you can kind of see some examples of me working within alchemy, creating different shapes, trying to get a little bit more detailed, and as I keep working, I get more creative and I kind of hone in on what type of design I want to create. Now, keeping in mind, I tried to stay loose in the beginning, and then I kind of remembered, like, hey, I'm going for this Tron-esque technology-based weaponry and outfit for for Bloodseeker, because by default he's kind of this tribal character. I want to keep that design, but I want to modernize it or futurize it, I guess, a little bit. So I've kind of gone in and refined the shapes, and after studying that, you can kind of see my progress. So I kind of pull those images up here, and these were all the different silhouette sheets that I created for Bloodseeker. I started with some very basic designs, got more into detail with what I was creating, and then I went into adding even more detail. These are very, very rough shapes, but you can see how effective they were. And here's kind of where I started focusing a little bit on these rigid body shapes. And I remember less is more, especially with silhouettes, so I was getting a little bit too detailed. Anyways, once I created all these, I kind of came in through here and I composited them all into one image so I could see them all at once. And from here, I kind of decided to choose, okay, what ones do I want to move forward with? Because there were some really strong designs with what I came up with. And even though some of them were really, really cool, I don't feel like they necessarily fit the style I was going for. Particularly, I love this one, but I don't really feel like it supported what I was going for. I really kind of started to fall in love with these simple shapes that almost kind of look like starships. Thinking like Star Trek, Tron, and I kind of really started to fall in love with these guys. So definitely take the time to do this, and present your work professionally with a final rendered image. Give it some safe frames, some titles, add your logo onto it, do some cool stuff like that to really push the boundaries. Now from here, I loaded up Dota, created a match, and took some screenshots of the character in different poses. So I basically came up with that image that we were looking at before, where I've got Bloodseeker on the pedestal with his weapon, and essentially I want to just kind of erase this and replace it with my own designs from those silhouettes. And then I can start thinking about other things. So first here, I kind of removed the background to make it solid so it was less noisy. And then the ground was still a little bit noisy in here, so moving forward I kind of painted over that really quickly. And then I refocused the composition and started adding the silhouettes that I felt most fond with. Again, just leaving it as the silhouette. Then I started to think back to the character guide, thinking about value, contrast, and patterns, and started to add the color. And I was looking back at the original design for Bloodseeker, and again it was mostly just red and white. So I felt like maybe I had a little bit too much black in the design. I want most of the details to be towards the face and the top, so the weapons really shouldn't be that detailed. And so I made a bunch of different designs, and I spent a lot of time doing this, and I really fell in love with these two after playing around a little bit in Photoshop. And the one on the left here, I like all the different details going on, and I feel like this could really show off my modeling abilities and make a really nice detailed weapon. And then I thought back, okay, looking at this from the outside in, is that going to be too noisy when I see it in the game? So basically what I did is I zoomed him way down, and I looked at him from far away. When I'm playing the game, he's going to be roughly, this big on screen. So again, going even further back from my monitor, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, what design speaks to me the most when he's running around and swiping? The design on the right actually is very simple, and it just reads better from far away. So I chose to go with this design over here and scrapping this one on the right, even though I like the one on the left a little bit better. Now I added some glowing parts here because again I'm going for that Tron look, giving him a mask and some interesting gloves and some belts and some other aspects to him. Maybe have some like floating spikes that are glowing, rotating around his neck or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but I really like this. So this design here is good, but I need to move it into further detail with my concept before I even start modeling this, because there's still a lot of areas I really don't know how I would build it in 3D quite yet. So I need to push this concept a little bit further, and that's going to be The third part in my tutorial series is taking the concept. Once we've figured out the basic colors, we've figured out the basic silhouette and design of the weapon. Now we need to go in and go into even more detail before we bring in this in 3D. If you skip the third part, then you're going to get started in 3D, and you're going to find that, wow, I didn't really think a lot of this design through, and things are probably going to change in the next part. I'm not sure because I haven't done it yet, but I'm assuming that this design might change a little bit as I start thinking about the functionality of this weapon and what it looks like in 3 dimensions. Now I added this little glow here at the button because I figured, you know, maybe this isn't glowing all the time. Maybe it only glows when he's about to attack somebody. So he has to be able to push a little button to power up his sword to be able to swipe. You know, and maybe that's a special move that one of the abilities he gains as he progresses and levels up throughout the match. Who knows? But I thought it was a cool little design, and from far away, that little button speaks volumes in my silhouette. You know, when a character would see the little glowing dot followed by this long glowing piece here, they know that they're in trouble. They probably are being attacked. So that's the whole thought process behind this. Okay, so here in Photoshop, this is where I kind of brought in my silhouette and I started painting over the top. For the most part, I would just kind of color grab some of the colors over here, and making sure I'm painting with a hard edge brush. And you know, it's very hard, especially if you don't have a tablet, to not really have the most beautiful line work going on. I like to block in with my color. I don't really like to draw lines. Every artist is different though. One thing that helps me is if I click one area and then I hold shift and click another area, it's going to draw a straight line from each point that I create. Now it might seem kind of simple, but this actually really helps when you're working at this basic form of, you know, adding silhouettes, looking for shapes, etc. And then I can hold Alt and just kind of color pick in space, and again continue to use that click and shift technique to really start creating some interesting designs, you know, within. And then I said, okay, his sword is actually quite white, so I might actually have to hit W, select all that stuff. I could hit G and then fill that in with the proper color. And pretty quickly, as you start doing this and, you know, cutting different shapes out, you can get some really interesting designs going within your weapons. And again, this is kind of how things begin to progress and change. And I'm already kind of liking what I have going on here. So you can very easily see how you're just doing simple paint overs of these silhouettes we did in Alchemy inside of Photoshop. Can really help speed up the process and help you work creatively. So again, in the second part here, we talked about creating silhouettes in Alchemy. We went over value patterns and silhouette guidelines with the Dota 2 character art guide, and then we kind of went over at the end, you know, how to do a simple paint over. In part 3, we're going to kind of talk about taking our final silhouette design and refining it with line art and some nice shading, so we can finally fully understand how this is going to look in 3D. After that, we can move into modeling, and then after modeling, it's obviously going to be all, you know, baking our textures, optimizing the game ready mesh, creating the diffuse map, the spec maps, the normal maps, all these different texture maps that are going to be loaded into the game, and then after that we'll import our final objects into the game engine and show you how to get them up and running, and then finally submit it to the Dota Workshop via Steam. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in part 3.